Hello and welcome to the i3 podcast. My name is Wouter Klein and I'm the Director of Content for the Investment Innovation Institute. For more information about our educational forums for institutional investors, please visit our website at www.i3-invest.com. There you can also subscribe to our complimentary newsletter i3 Insights, in which we discuss investment strategy and asset allocation questions with asset owners around the world. Now, as you all know, we love our disclaimers in this industry, so here's ours. This recording is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute financial advice. Please enjoy the show. Welcome to the i3 podcast. I'm here today with Adam Gilmour, who's the co-founder and chief executive of Gilmour Space. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Walter.
So before you got into space technology and rockets, you were one of us. You were in the financial and banking industry as a managing director with Citigroup. Can you tell me a little bit about your career at that time?
Sure. I started in Citibank in Sydney as a foreign exchange trader, and in those days, Citibank was the number one foreign exchange bank in the world. It still is to this time, but it was a massive industry back then. And then I moved up to Singapore 2 years after that, and was trading again foreign exchange in the Singapore dealing room. And then I diversified out into currency derivatives, probably 5 years into my career. And I did derivatives probably for the next 15 years in one form or another. I went into interest rate derivatives and, all the other commodity derivatives, etc. And then for the last 8 years I was there, I ended up running the sales business for corporate clients in financial markets for Asia Pacific. So we dealt with customers that were from, 3 or 4 persons, small, medium enterprises, all the way up to the biggest multinationals. And I think what kind of attracted me to leave the bank and start my own company was we started doing a lot of work with small to medium and medium MME companies. And I literally saw, people start companies with very small groups of people and then grow through time and then become like, billion-dollar companies with massive revenue. And I thought, that's not a bad way to go. If you're going to put your heart and soul into a project for 10 years, you should want to get some payout like that at the end of it. And then I've always been a space fan, so I just thought, naturally, let me have a look at space and see if there is an opportunity. And I looked at space for probably 7 or 8 years before I figured out there was an opportunity and there was something I could pursue and do and hopefully make money out of. And that's why I started doing rockets, and that's when I left the bank.
So how do you get involved in rockets? I mean, I presume it's not something you just do in your back garden.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to say. Where do you start, right? So where do you start? You start small. And you start with small rocket engines and small rockets. And if you do that, that doesn't scare a lot of people. So if you're trying to do this for the first time in Australia, people fly hobby rockets here all the time. So people are used to small things. So when we were doing the initial testing of our rocket engines, they weren't at a size that would scare a lot of people. So, we did one rocket engine test in the backyard of one of my properties. We ended up doing more rocket engine tests in my parents' farm, and then as they got bigger and bigger, we started looking for a longer-term strategy. And now we test our rocket engines in a quarry, which is in the middle of nowhere, and with all the safety systems and everything in place. So our technology and our complexity and our risk went up as we got better at managing it. And then in terms of, you've got to employ a whole lot of rocket engineers, and there's not a lot in Australia. So again, started with a very small group of people and then tried to hire people in from overseas. And then you get to a critical mass where, you've got people in the company 5-6 years with good experience that are teaching all the graduates that come in.
Yeah.
And then, when you're doing rockets, you could get the very detailed plan, engineering design plan from a competitor, and it still wouldn't mean that you could do the rocket easily and launch it easily. You have to go through the process of building, testing, assembling. A lot of the complexity is just putting the pieces together and making sure they fit together and work together. And that is experience you build through time. And that's how you learn.
So there's sort of high barriers to entry in this industry.
Yes.
When I started out as a financial journalist many years ago, I followed a couple of companies on the Dutch stock market, Euronext stock market. And one of my first companies was New Sky Satellites, which was a company that shot satellites into space. Is that sort of what your company does? Can you tell us a little bit about what is actually the industry of rockets?
Yeah, so we're like the Federal Express of space. So we take payloads of customers, which is generally satellites, and we give them a ride to space. So we don't actually sell our rockets to anybody. We just sell a ride on our rocket. And the complexity of that is space is a big thing, and it's not like you go to space, you go to one place. There's multiple altitudes, multiple inclinations, and in each altitude there's different risks associated with it. So it's quite a complicated journey to take a customer, because you've got to make sure their satellite fits in your rocket, can take all the forces the rocket is going to have as it goes to space, and then you can deliver it to where it wants to go. And a lot of customers are getting trickier and trickier orbits that they want to take the satellites into. And that leads very well into a small launch vehicle, because small launch vehicles are nimble. They can go to many different places in space with a single satellite or just a couple of satellites. They don't have to take up 60 satellites at a time like the big rockets do.
Right. And so is it mainly satellites, or are there also other things that are shot into space?
Well, we've got a small launch vehicle, so we're taking satellites now, but we are going to work on a bigger launch vehicle that will be able to take cargo to space stations, and eventually we want to take people up into space as well. So, I think, 20 years from now, there will be a bigger market to take cargo up into space, not only to low Earth orbit, but, to lunar orbits and even delivering to the moon.
Yeah. So you're planning on taking people into space as well?
We definitely are. We started the company to take people into space, and it's definitely on our timeline.
Are you going the way of Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I fully intend to go to space on one of my vehicles.
That's great.
And I want to go more the way of Elon Musk, because, if I get a little bit complicated here.
Yeah.
But Bezos and Branson are doing suborbital flights, which is still great, but you just go up and come straight back down again. I want to go on an orbit and circle the Earth and be in space for a couple of days and, really experience it. That'll be awesome.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, because we mainly cater for the asset owner superannuation industry in Australia and New Zealand, is that there's actually a couple of superannuation funds that are backing your company. I think you put out a release in June that you raised 61 million in a Series C round of funding, which included a number of funds, including Hesta, Hostplus, and Yes Super. Why do you think that they are interested in your industry, and what is where do you see this industry go? What's the future of it?
I think it's a couple of things. I think what I'm happy about is the super funds are divvying up a little bit of their money to put on, riskier projects but have much higher yields. That's kind of 101 of managing big asset pools. You have some in low risk, some in medium risk, some in high risk. And I'm really happy to see they've gone to what many might say is the highest risk, venture. But even in venture, they haven't they're not really going into like seed or Series A or even B. So they're waiting for companies to prove their track record before they come in. And they're coming in really at what you'd call the growth stage of a company. which is probably the right thing for them to do in terms of risk management. I don't think they have a view necessarily they want to get into space. I think they just look at companies on their merits, see what the opportunity is.
Yeah.
I also think for Australian super funds, there is an element of nation building. There's a cultural aspect that they have so much money that they have to be diligent with that money beyond financial. They have to have a social impact. And I think super fund managers understand this and they accept it and they want to do something about it. So I think, when you are bringing a new capability to the country, we've never had access to space in Australia before. It's a fantastic nation building capability. I think that resonates with them to say, good company, good revenue prospects, but this is providing a capability Australia's never had before.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the reasons why, we got some good interest from super funds.
Yeah. And you're based in Queensland, and I saw that you recently got approval to build your own launch site at Abbott Point. What are sort of the advantages and disadvantages of being a local Australian space company?
There's more disadvantages than advantages. I think the disadvantages is mainly the risk appetite of our government is significantly less than a lot of other governments around the world. Very easy to say the Americans always do it differently, but a lot of things the Americans do work really, really well, and they definitely take a lot more risk on space and defense.
Yeah.
And so that it's, I look at my competitors overseas, and at the same level that we are in, they're getting $50 million launch contracts with the Air Force in America before they've even gone to space.
Right.
That just makes it a lot harder for me to compete against them. I think, some of the benefits is it's a great place to attract talent. So we attract talent from all over the world, and they very much want to come to Australia. As we've been growing our headcount, the other interesting thing we found is, we're going out interviewing, mid-career people or even later stage career people, and they basically have been out and about in the world doing fantastic, experienced jobs. And then for social reasons, they decide to come and move to Australia. And then you can snavel them up and get them to come and work for you, where you might have struggled if you were in the US or in Europe, because they would have already been working for a space company already.
So can you give us a bit of a sense of how large is this space cargo market, and what are sort of future developments?
Yeah, so we estimate that the market for launching small satellites into space will grow to $5 billion by 2025. And that's based on analysis that we've done about how many of these broadband satellites need to be replaced in any given year.
Yep.
And, we showed that material to all our investors, and, we stress tested it, etc. And I think they all recognized that was a clear possibility. Deutsche Bank came out last week with some numbers to say that the market that we're going for is going to grow to $8 billion of annual revenue globally by 2030. So that kind of is another validation, totally independent of us, about what the market would be. And they're looking at the same things we are. How many satellites have to be launched? How many have to be replaced, etc.
So is it mainly broadband-based satellites that are going up in the air?
It's mainly, probably 90% of all the satellites that will be launched in the next 5 years are for broadband communication. It's just such a sweet spot for space. It's such a high revenue opportunity. I mean, you're basically directly competing with terrestrial telcos that are charging you an arm and a leg to connect up to towers. So it's a real easy swap in, swap out of technology that space can get access to. So, that's where a lot of the interest is in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah. So has your company been affected by, the current pandemic that's going on? Are people putting less satellites in the air? Or?
No, the space market's still been going very strongly, but what you're seeing is supply chain issues. So, especially in Australia, we have a decent supply chain in Australia. And when the states go into lockdown, that affects a lot of our suppliers. For a period of time, they just don't go to the factory and make our stuff. So that's impacting us right now. The other big impact has been global freight has dropped dramatically, especially air freight. So people never understood. I knew it as a banker because I dealt with the aviation industry, how much of the revenue of a traditional airliner comes from freight. So they basically, the flights have just dramatically dropped. So the cargo space in these flights has obviously dropped. So we've seen air freight prices probably go up 5 or 6 times higher than where they were before. And we do air freight a lot of stuff from overseas down. So that's been a problem. And then the other problem we're seeing right now is there's a chip shortage globally. I'm not even sure exactly why and what's going on, but we're hearing that the demand for chips is huge. The supply is constrained. And a lot of our supply chain is basically saying we don't have the supply.
Yeah.
So that's a problem.
Yeah. So how do you build a rocket? I mean, do you get all the parts from overseas, from factories, and then you put it together here in Australia? Or how does it work? Because I understand that some parts you actually do 3D printing, and you've experimented even a bit with printing 3D fuel.
Yeah.
How do you build a rocket?
So we do a mix of everything. So we manufacture some things ourselves internally. We manufacture some things in the supply chain in Australia. And then we also import in components from overseas. So rocket engine nozzles, payload fairings is something we buy from overseas at the moment. And so we bring them in and then integrate them to our vehicle. But the major bits of the vehicle we manufacture ourselves. So the tank final assembly, we do all of that. The vehicle airframe structure, we do that. And then all the other bits and pieces you start to literally bolt together, very much like how you make a car.
Right.
Or a bus.
Or a bus, just a slightly different trajectory. Now, this technology, as you said, it's quite complex. It relies a lot on the people and the expertise of them. And we saw, I think, a couple of months ago, your company's name popped up in an article about spying activities, where apparently there was some spying activity from the Chinese government into your company. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we just saw our name in the papers. My name was in the paper as well. We have pretty good firewalls and hacker protection in the company. So we are aware of attacks into the company that get blocked. And generally the frequency of attacks goes up dramatically after we do a press release, especially about a piece of technology that we've tested. So if we do a press release on a big engine test, the attacks from internet come up a lot. We get a lot of phishing attacks as well. I don't think the Chinese have any real good information on the company or on us. I think a lot of it they've just gleaned off the web. If you look at there's been some videos done of the SpaceX Star whatever factory in Texas. That's really high levels of detail that Elon Musk allowed that company to go into his factory and see stuff. That is well beyond anything that I think the Chinese have on us. So I'm not super worried about it.
Yeah, you did have an instance in your Singapore factory where you had I think, news crew come in that might not have been a news crew. Yeah.
We think they pretended to be from a Chinese TV station, and we never saw the show.
Yeah.
That could have been. But again, that was early days in our company. I don't think they would have got a lot of good stuff out of that. And we've changed the design about 3 times since then anyway.
Yeah, right. So at the moment, there's a lot of interest in getting people to Mars, setting up a base on the moon. What is sort of your views on where the space industry might go? Do you think it's a realistic plan that we put people on Mars?
I don't think it's realistic in the short term. I think it's inevitable in the long term that humanity will expand throughout the solar system. I think totally feasible. We've got the technology already. It's just money and time. The problem I have with Mars is it's a long way away. It takes 6 months to get there. You got to match the orbit. So by the time you come back, it's another 2 years. Light travels, it takes anywhere between 18 and 42 minutes to get a round trip voice, radio communication. So I think it's a heck of a lot easier to colonize the moon and set up bases on the moon first. It takes 3 days to get to the moon. The signal back and forth is a few seconds. It's just a lot easier. So, I remember one of the board members of SpaceX is a guy, Steve Jurvetson. I was on a panel with him, and he's on SpaceX board, so he's talking about Mars. And I said, look, there'll be 1 million people living on the moon before 10,000 people live on Mars. That's my estimate.
Right. And when do you think that will happen?
I don't know. I think I'd be very happy to see a permanent moon base before the end of the decade. I think it will happen. I think there'll be an American one, a Chinese one. You probably have to look at Antarctica. Like I would say, how I would estimate how many people will be on the moon is I'd say how many people are working in Antarctica. And if that's 1,000 or 2,000 people, I'd say for the rest of this century, that's probably how many people are going to live and work on the moon, and maybe times it by 2.
Yeah.
The critical piece is, how does it become profitable? How does it become economically driven that you can live and work on the moon? And no one's come up with a really good idea about how that will work in the short term.
Yeah, because that was my next question. What's the benefit of having a basis or a permanent station on the moon?
The main benefit is just the gravity is so much less than the Earth, and if you're going to send anything off the moon to explore the rest of the solar system, that's a really good place to do it. I read a lot of hard science fiction books, and in most of the books, these writers' consensus is that the moon is humanity's base for exploration outside of the moon because of the gravity.
So it's easier to get liftoff with a rocket.
Yeah, you can basically lift probably about 20 times more payload for the same rocket off the surface of the moon compared to Earth because the gravity is 1/6.
Yeah. So for those that are interested in that, what are good science fiction books? Because a lot of it seems to be not very scientifically based. What are you reading?
You can put me on the spot here. There's a really good book, Ender's Game. The guy that wrote Ender's Game, Orson Scott, yeah. The Ender's Game is set about 100 to 200 years into the future. And the series of books basically talks about, humanity's first colonization into the solar system. And so, there's a big base on the moon. That's become the massive industrial center. So industry moves off Earth and goes onto the moon for pollution reasons and all the other stuff. And then, mining is done all the way out into the Oort cloud. And it's a good book because it doesn't sugarcoat the complexities of living and working in space. It basically, everybody in space is an engineer, and they're constantly fixing the spaceships that they're in, and, stealing parts and, doing that. I think that's the reality of space for a long, long time. It's not going to be gleaming starships that work autonomously and all that kind of stuff.
More trying to get a steampunk vehicle.
Something like that, yeah.
So what is next for you? You talked a little bit about that you want to go to bigger rockets, bigger payloads. Where do you see yourself in the company in the next 5 years? Yeah,
we're going to go into bigger payloads. Look, our greatest challenge is getting to space in the first place, and that's in the next 12 months. So we've got a big challenge ahead of us to successfully get to space. We'll probably have a couple of attempts to do it before we do it successfully, and that's pretty normal for rockets.
Yeah.
And then once we've done that, we want to quickly move into bigger vehicles. And so we want the next biggest vehicle in 2023 and the bigger vehicle after that in 2025. So that's the next 5 years for us.
Yeah. And so with the bigger vehicles, is that just that you can get more?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I mean, so when we talk to customers about, replacing their constellations, we said to them, our first rocket will be able to take one of your satellites up and we'll charge $7 million. And then they said, what about the next one? We said, the next one will be able to take 4 up and we're going to charge $9 million. And they said, well, I'd much rather deal $9 million for 4 than 7 for 1.
Right.
On economics of scale. So we think the sweet spot for small launch vehicles is around 800 to 1,200 kilograms of payload. And so that's what we think is going to be the mainstay vehicle for us for a while.
Yeah. Well, Adam, thank you very much for this conversation. It was very interesting, and all the best with Gilmour Space.
Thanks a lot. Pleasure to talk, Woda.
Thank you for listening to the i3 podcast. For more information, please visit www.i3-invest.com. Thank you very much.